Could the echoing silence of a luxurious yet desolate home be shattered by the anguished cries of a heartbroken child? And could the simple, honest touch of the most overlooked person be the key to rebuilding a shattered life? This is a story about the searing heat of loss, the unexpected sanctuary of genuine care, and how the deepest human connections are often found in the most unlikely of places, far removed from wealth and superficial comfort. If you enjoy narratives about courage, overcoming tragedy, and the power of sincere love, make sure to save this story for later. Robert Williams stood in the gleaming, modern kitchen of his custom-built home in Greenwich, Connecticut, the morning sun reflecting blindingly off the polished marble countertops. The house, designed for his late wife Sarah, felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum of broken promises. Robert, 38, a decorated battalion chief with the New Haven Fire Department, was a man forged in steel and smoke, capable of rushing into roaring infernos to save strangers, yet utterly helpless against the internal fire of his own grief and the inconsolable sorrow of his son. His navy blue uniform, usually immaculate, carried a faint odor of stale coffee and exhaustion. His 8-month-old son, Lucas, lay in the imported ergonomic rocker nearby, his face a mottled crimson, his tiny body trembling with a fresh, relentless wail that seemed to vibrate with all the sorrow in the house. This was not a fussy cry. This was the shriek of a soul lost and alone, a sound that had been the soundtrack to Robert's life for the 6 months since Sarah was lost in a catastrophic training accident. "Chief Williams, I simply cannot endure this," declared Barbara Brown, a slender woman in her early 50s wearing an expensive tailored cardigan and a pearl necklace. She was the 7th nanny Robert had hired in the last 4 months, a graduate of the esteemed Norland College with 2 decades of experience in high-net-worth households. She dramatically dropped a silver rattle onto the floor, its clatter loud in the sudden pause of Lucas's scream. "The child is refractory. He is biting, scratching, and the sheer volume of his distress is medically concerning. My contract stipulates a harmonious environment. I am giving my notice, effective immediately." Barbara didn't wait for a response, her Italian leather heels clicking a furious rhythm across the hardwood floor and down the sweeping staircase, the sound fading only when the front door of reinforced oak slammed shut. Robert felt a familiar, cold wave of defeat wash over him. His hands, steady enough to wield a fire hose or pry open crushed metal, shook slightly as he watched his son, the heir to his quiet legacy and the spitting image of Sarah, reject every attempt at comfort. He was a man who commanded hundreds of firefighters, who managed multi-million-dollar city budgets, yet he couldn't calm his own infant son. Lucas's screams returned with renewed vigor, a raw sound of absolute despair that clawed at Robert's composure. Robert knelt by the rocker, his face etched with concern. "Lucas, please, Dad is here," he murmured, extending his large, calloused hands. Lucas arched his back violently, twisting away and escalating his cry into a desperate, choking sob. It was the same agonizing rejection he experienced every single day. Since Sarah's death, the baby refused to be held by anyone: his father, the succession of expensive nannies, or the private pediatric nurses. Robert moved to the oversized plush velvet armchair near the crib, burying his face in his hands. He was 14 years older than Sarah had been, and his once dark hair now had stark silver streaks at the temples. He could buy any company, influence any city council, but he couldn't buy his son's peace. "God, Sarah, what am I doing wrong?" he whispered, his eyes finding the only picture on his vast mahogany desk, a candid shot of Sarah holding Lucas the day he was born, her face radiant with love. "He doesn't accept me. He doesn't accept anyone. I don't know how to help him." Just as the silence of Robert's despair was broken only by Lucas's heartbreaking cries, the doorbell chimed, not the main entry chime, but the discreet one for service personnel. Maria Davis, the stern yet kind house manager, appeared hesitantly at the kitchen door. "Chief Williams, pardon the interruption, but the cleaning service sent a message. There was a mishap with the usual day cleaner. She had a family emergency. They've sent a replacement from the evening shift to cover. Her name is Michelle Lee." Robert sighed, irritated by the further intrusion. "Fine, Maria. Just tell her to be quiet. If by some miracle Lucas falls asleep, I don't want anything to wake him." Maria nodded and departed. Robert turned back to his son, whose wails were beginning to sound hoarse. It was as if every bit of pain over the loss of his mother was escaping in this raw, unending cry. Robert's own eyes started to burn. He reached for his phone, punching a number. "Anna, cancel all meetings for the next 2 weeks. I am taking a leave of absence until I sort this out with my son." His assistant, Anna Allen, protested about the impending union negotiations and the state budget review. "Cancel everything, Anna. My son is more important than the entire city budget," Robert roared, slamming the phone down. He sat on the floor beside the crib, resigning himself to the noise, his heart heavy with the certainty of his failure as a father. Meanwhile, Michelle Lee, 26, pushed her cleaning cart onto the top floor of the elite building. She moved with quiet determination, a stark contrast to the house's chaotic energy. She had only slept 2 hours after spending the early morning at the charity ward of St. Jude's tending to her younger brother Jacob Walker, who was battling a rare and aggressive form of leukemia. "Michelle, you must rest, honey," the night nurse had pleaded. But Michelle had no time for rest. She only had work. Every additional dollar she earned from cleaning high-end apartments or waitressing late at night went directly into the fund for Jacob's specialized treatment, a treatment that was not covered by their basic insurance. She knew this specific service entrance well. She had been cleaning this immense penthouse for 5 months, always in the deepest hours of the morning when the residents were asleep. It was solitary, silent work, just how she liked it. But today, the silence was violently fractured by a child's piercing cries coming from the Williams residence. Michelle quickly stored her cleaning supplies, her hands moving mechanically. She had heard whispers from Maria about the wealthy, grieving chief and his inconsolable son. As she was stowing a vacuum cleaner, she heard quick footsteps and agitated voices coming down the main hall. A woman in a perfectly tailored suit, Barbara, the 7th nanny, passed by the service hallway speaking loudly and irritably into her phone. "I warned you this wouldn't work. The boy is impossible, absolutely lost. No nanny can withstand that child. He's a lost cause." The woman disappeared into the elevator, leaving only the echo of her harsh judgment. Michelle froze, processing the words. She knew Robert was a widower with an infant son. The child's desperate cry resumed, a sound of utter abandonment. It was a cry Michelle knew intimately. It was the sound she herself had made, huddled in her tiny shared apartment in Bridgeport after her own father had left, and her mother had to work 3 double shifts to keep them afloat. "That baby is suffering," Michelle whispered to herself, smoothing the rough fabric of her blue work smock. Lucas's cry was the universal sound of pain, regardless of the financial status of his surroundings. She knew what it meant to feel completely alone in the world, surrounded by noise but starved of love. The crying subsided, offering a brief respite, and Michelle cautiously began to clean the hallway carpet. She had to focus on the work. She had bills to pay, a brother to save. She methodically pushed the heavy equipment, the rhythmic sound of the cleaner trying to drown out the internal calculation of Jacob's medical costs. The specialized drug alone cost more than her entire annual income. "God, give me strength to find the rest," she prayed silently. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Jacob's nurse. "Michelle, Jacob is awake and asking for you. He's stable, but he wants to see you." A rush of pure, intense relief flooded her. Jacob was stable. Maybe the experimental drugs were working. She finished cleaning the main corridor, her task complete, yet she found herself unable to leave. The whimpering from the master suite was now weaker, the sound of an infant wearing himself out from grief. She paused near the entrance to the master wing. The truth was stark. The world's most powerful man was failing to calm his son, and the house was cold and empty despite its opulence. Robert might be rich, but he was poor in the only currency that mattered right now: genuine, unconditional love. Demai. Block 2. Development of the conflict, emotional deepening and turning points. 1,500 words. The quiet devastation of the Williams home was interrupted again, not by a cry this time, but by the relentless, insistent ringing of Michelle's worn cell phone at 2:17 a.m. She was finally dozing off on the tiny, lumpy sofa in her cramped studio apartment in Bridgeport, having just returned from her late waitressing shift. On the screen, the name Williams Maintenance blinked, an automated contact from the cleaning service supervisor, Mrs. Davies. "Michelle, you must get to Greenwich immediately." Mrs. Davies's voice was tight with urgency. A main water pipe burst in the Williams penthouse, a catastrophic flood. The basement, the service areas, everywhere. "The damage reports are insane. The regular emergency crew is tied up. You're the only one who can get there quickly. Chief Williams has authorized a significant bonus, double your hourly rate, for immediate arrival and stabilization of the site. Extra pay. That was the magic word, the only thing that mattered. It represented another day of medication for Jacob. "I'm on my way," Michelle replied, instantly awake, her own exhaustion fading into the background of her urgent necessity. 40 minutes later, she was pulling her specialized extraction equipment from the back of the service van in the opulent underground parking garage. Robert was waiting for her near the service elevator, his face pale and drawn, his hair disheveled. He was wearing an old New Haven FD sweatshirt and looked less like a battalion chief and more like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "Thank God you're here, Ms. Lee," Robert managed, his voice a low, rough rumble. "It's chaos. The water is everywhere, flooding the lower levels. It's already damaged the antique Persian rug in the main lounge." Maria, who was holding a frantic phone call with the insurance adjuster, directed Michelle. "The chief's newest nanny, Miss Laura Perez, arrived just an hour ago, but the poor soul is in the West Wing trying to calm Lucas. He's been hysterical for hours. Please, Michelle, be as quiet as a ghost." Michelle nodded, her eyes focused, already assessing the sheer scale of the water damage across the imported marble and the valuable wood flooring. She started working in the service kitchen, a methodical, silent machine, deploying industrial vacuums and specialized drying pads. This was grueling labor, heavy and thankless, but she performed it with a quiet dedication, her mind solely focused on the financial calculation. "This bonus plus my waitressing tips, that covers the anti-rejection meds for 5 days." As Michelle worked her way through the long, dark corridor toward the master wing, mopping up the last streaks of water, she passed the open door to Lucas's nursery. Inside, the lights were dim, and she heard a young, clipped voice speaking on the phone, clearly irritated. "Look, Mom, the pay is astronomical. I just have to tolerate this screaming menace until I can put Chief Williams' personal nanny on my resume for my Geneva application." The voice belonging to Miss Laura, the 10th nanny in 4 months, whispered loudly. "He hasn't stopped whimpering since I arrived. I'm just waiting for him to pass out from exhaustion so I can officially log his sleep period. Then I can get some rest too." Michelle froze, the heavy mop handle slipping slightly in her wet hand. She glanced through the narrow opening and saw Miss Laura perched casually on the glider chair, her back to Lucas's Italian crib, scrolling through her phone, completely ignoring the soft, cyclical whimpering emanating from the baby. Lucas was awake, his green eyes so much like Sarah's, wide and glistening with unshed tears, silently watching the indifferent woman who was supposed to care for him. Robert was huddled in his home office, staring at a cluster of 3 small pinhole cameras he had installed over the past 2 days. He had placed one discreetly near the crib, one above the changing station, and one high in the corner of the room. It was an act of desperate, cynical paranoia. "I am a battalion chief. I am responsible for every life under my command. I need to know who is in my home," he had rationalized, telling himself it was about liability and legal protection. But deep down, he was testing them, trying to find the flaw in the professional facade of the women he was forced to hire. He clicked on the live feed, his heart a dull, heavy stone in his chest, half expecting to see another disgruntled caregiver abusing the high-end amenities. What he saw, however, caused the air to catch in his throat. On the screen, Michelle, still in her damp blue work uniform, had entered the nursery. She was moving with incredible stillness, having placed her equipment outside the doorway. The indifferent nanny was still absorbed in her phone, oblivious. Michelle paused, her eyes meeting Lucas's. The baby's whimpering ceased instantly, replaced by a silent, focused curiosity. He saw her, a stranger, but his reaction was entirely different. Robert watched as Michelle put a finger to her lips, offering a gentle, almost conspiratorial smile. She didn't approach the crib, knowing she was not supposed to. Instead, she knelt silently on the floor in a dark corner of the room, her eyes never leaving Lucas's. Then, slowly, quietly, she began to sing. It wasn't a sophisticated lullaby. It was a simple, slightly off-key Spanish folk song, Arroro mi niño, sung with a heartbreakingly raw, honest tenderness. She sang not for anyone's benefit, but simply because she saw a child in pain, and this was her only way to offer comfort without crossing a line. Lucas, who rejected all noise, all touch, was captivated. Robert watched, frozen, as his son's tiny hand reached out of the crib railings toward the sound. The tears in his eyes stopped flowing. He listened, his head cocked, the small, desperate furrows on his brow relaxing into an expression of absolute peace. The disinterested nanny finally ended her call and sighed, turning around only to gasp when she realized Lucas was awake and silent. "Oh, you're awake," she said flatly, pulling out a noisy plastic toy. Lucas immediately turned his back on her and strained toward the figure on the floor. Michelle, recognizing the risk of the nanny noticing her, silently retreated to the doorway, giving the baby one last soft nod. As she disappeared, Lucas, in a gesture that ripped Robert's heart open, slumped back down, not screaming but resting, comforted by the brief, pure moment of connection. Robert watched the full interaction play out in the grainy night vision footage, the tears streaming down his face, blurring the screen. It wasn't the flood that made him cry. It was the realization of his son's absolute loneliness and the genuine, unsolicited compassion of a woman he had hired to scrub his floors. He hadn't seen the cleaning. He had seen the care. He hadn't seen a quiet employee. He had seen the heart his son was desperately searching for. He bolted from the office and found Michelle meticulously drying the floorboards in the dining room. "Ms. Lee, stop! Now!" Robert commanded, his voice thick with emotion. Michelle, startled, straightened up, wiping a stray lock of hair from her damp forehead. "Chief Williams, is there a problem? Is the water damage spreading?" Robert shook his head, running a weary hand through his hair. "The problem is solved. The problem was never the water. It was me." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I have just seen something that no amount of money could buy and no degree could teach." He met her eyes, which were clear and filled only with tired confusion. "I watched you. I watched you with Lucas." Michelle's expression tightened with fear. She thought he was going to fire her for trespassing or singing on the job. "I apologize, Chief. I know I shouldn't have—" "No," Robert interrupted, his voice powerful and absolute. "Don't apologize. You did what 9 highly paid professionals couldn't do. You saw him. You gave him peace." Robert walked toward her, his large figure casting a shadow in the newly restored light. "I'm making you a new offer. Effective immediately, you are Lucas's personal nanny. Miss Laura is dismissed. Your salary will be triple what you make here, guaranteed, with benefits. But that's not the deal." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a serious, compassionate tone. "I know about your brother Jacob and his condition. Maria told me about your long hours and your visits to St. Jude's. You need $250,000 for the specialized treatment. I will pay for all of it. Private treatment, the best hospital, the complete drug regimen starting tomorrow. In return, you just have to do one thing. Love my son the way you just did." Michelle stared at him, unable to speak. The mention of Jacob, the vast sum, the sudden release from her grinding poverty. It was dizzying. "Chief Williams, I have no qualifications," she stammered, the words feeling insignificant. "I'm just a cleaner from a low-income community in Bridgeport. I don't have the certifications, the pedagogy." Robert smiled, a genuine, sorrowful smile that hadn't reached his eyes in months. "My son chose you. That quiet moment you gave him is worth more than every certificate in the world. He needs a heart, not a resume." Overwhelmed, Michelle felt a single tear trace a clean line through the grime on her cheek. "I accept," she whispered, the relief so profound it felt like a physical weight lifting from her chest. "I will care for Lucas as if he were my own son." 3 weeks later, the house was unrecognizable. Lucas was thriving. He wasn't just calm, he was happy. His cries had been replaced by gurgles and laughter, and he had started babbling the word Chell, his version of Michelle. Robert found himself cancelling fewer meetings and spending more time at home, watching them play, a quiet gratitude growing in his heart. However, the peace was soon shattered. Robert was in his study when Maria announced a visitor. "Chief Williams, Mr. Donald Taylor is here. He says it's urgent and pertains to the Lucas Williams Trust." Donald Taylor, 56, was Robert's late wife's cousin, a meticulous tax attorney and the official fiduciary overseer of Lucas's inheritance, a man who believed the Williams legacy demanded a certain standard. Taylor marched into the room, impeccably dressed and radiating cold disapproval. He had seen Michelle playing with Lucas in the sunlit garden outside. "Robert, we need to talk," Taylor stated, skipping pleasantries. "I have heard the disturbing rumors about the new caregiver. I understand you have hired an unqualified cleaning woman to care for Lucas, the sole heir to a fortune." His voice was laced with unconcealed condescension. "I hired a woman who saved my son, Donald," Robert replied, his tone immediately defensive. Her former profession is irrelevant, Taylor scoffed, crossing his expensive leather briefcase over one knee. Irrelevant? She's a cleaner from the housing projects. Lucas's future demands the best education, the best influence, not this. I am telling you, Robert, I am concerned about the stability of the Williams estate, and more importantly, the integrity of the heir's upbringing. The battle had officially begun. Donald Taylor, the meticulous and calculating fiduciary, did not waste time with further warnings. 2 weeks after his initial frosty visit, Robert was summoned to an emergency board meeting at the opulent offices of the Williams Trust, located high above Manhattan. The atmosphere was immediately hostile. Mr. Alistair Finch, a senior board member and a former business associate of Sarah's father, didn't even wait for Robert to sit down. "Robert, what the devil is going on? We are receiving calls from the Wall Street Journal. Your name, the Williams name, is being associated with sensationalist tabloid nonsense." He shoved a heavy tablet across the mahogany table. The headlines flashed luridly across the screen, each one a calculated assault. Grief-stricken fire chief replaces dead wife with low-income nanny. Custodian or co-conspirator. Concerns over heir's safety and the cleaner's true intentions. And the worst, fire chief's custody in jeopardy. Unqualified nanny poses threat to Williams' fortune. The articles were filled with malicious, anonymous quotes. One source close to the family claimed that Michelle was neglectful and only allowed Lucas to eat unhealthy canned food. Another, supposedly a former colleague of the deceased, implied that Robert was dishonoring Sarah's memory by getting involved with a woman of Michelle's social standing. Robert recognized the calculated hand of Taylor in every manufactured detail. "This is libel, gentlemen," Robert said, his voice dangerously low. "Michelle is an exceptional caregiver. She is saving my son's life and soul. This is nothing but a smear campaign orchestrated by Donald." Taylor, sitting calmly with a smug expression, merely adjusted his silk tie. "It doesn't matter what the truth is, Robert. It matters what the market perceives. Our corporate stock dipped 3 points this morning. The perception is that you are unstable, making irresponsible decisions that jeopardize the Williams legacy. And as fiduciary, I have a legal and moral obligation to protect Lucas's future." Robert's phone vibrated with a message from his attorney, Miss Evelyn Reed. The text was short and chilling. Taylor filed an emergency motion for temporary guardianship, citing instability and reckless disregard for the heir's welfare. Hearing set for next Thursday. "This is serious." Robert excused himself, his mind reeling. He knew he needed to prepare for the fight of his life, but he felt an agonizing conflict. He had asked Michelle to keep their arrangement quiet, but the media had still found her. He had to protect his son, but protecting his son meant choosing between the fragile happiness Michelle had brought and the cold legal custody battle. When Robert returned to Greenwich, the house felt heavier, the peace ruptured by the outside world's toxicity. He found Michelle in the sunroom, reading a thick picture book to Lucas. The baby was nestled against her chest, listening intently, occasionally patting the page with a tiny, curious hand. The sight of their tender bond, a sanctuary of genuine, uncomplicated love, only deepened Robert's pain. He closed the door quietly, leaning against it, watching. Michelle, sensing his presence, looked up, her expression immediately concerned. "Robert, you're home early. Is everything okay?" Robert shook his head, running a hand over his tired face. "No, Michelle, it's not. I need to talk to you. It's about Donald and the board." He gently took Lucas, who immediately began to fuss at the separation, though he calmed when Michelle remained nearby. "Michelle, he's filed a motion for temporary guardianship." He explained the legal filing, the media storm, and the central cruel argument that Michelle's lack of professional qualification and their socio-economic difference proved Robert's negligence and instability. "But this is completely false," Michelle exclaimed, rising from the chair, her quiet composure finally broken by fierce indignation. "I spend every morning with Jacob before coming here. I monitor Lucas's nutrition, his sleep patterns. He's healthier than ever. I sing to him, I talk to him in Spanish. I teach him things they would never teach him in a fancy nursery school." She gestured toward her worn backpack. "I bring books from the public library. He's learning the value of simple things, of being loved, not just the cost of things." Robert nodded, his heart aching with the truth of her words. "I know, Michelle, but the court needs stability. It needs the appearance of responsibility. My lawyer, Ms. Reed, was blunt. To win this case, I need to remove any element that could be used against me, any irregularity that suggests recklessness. He couldn't say the words, but they hung heavy in the air between them. He needed to let her go.